I would like to preface this video by saying that I am not a psychologist nor a professional in research. I am simply a senior in high school who happens to make video essays and happens to be on the autism spectrum. Please keep this in mind as you watch this video. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurological developmental disorder that presents itself in many ways, hence why it's called a spectrum. There are many different traits that come with it, and the potency of each trait varies a lot for each autistic person. For example, you may have an autistic person who is completely nonverbal, unable to communicate using their voice. And then, in the same breath, you may have an autistic person who seemingly just can't stop talking. One is not more or less autistic than the other, they just present differently and may need different accommodations. One common trait of autism spectrum disorder is special interests and hyperfixations. The latter term also can apply to a number of other neurodivergent conditions, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A special interest or hyperfixation goes beyond just liking or caring about something as a neurotypical person would. For some neurodivergent individuals, these interests can become outright disabling, disrupting one's ability to focus. I know, at least for myself, I often find myself struggling to complete schoolwork because my brain just wants to focus on whatever my hyperfixation at any given time happens to be. Recently, that's been Sonic the Hedgehog. So, I'll often find myself bargaining with my brain to get work done. For example, getting to read an issue of the IDW comics for every page of a government packet I get done. A common thing that comes along with special interests or hyperfixations is the want or need to info dump, which is quite literally what it sounds like. The dumping of information or thoughts, whether that be verbally, over text, or through a different means. A video essay is also quite literally what it sounds like, an essay presented in the form of a video. On YouTube, these are often made to talk about specific forms of media or to discuss educational or political matters. My name is Tyler, I am autistic, and this is a video essay about the possible correlation between autism and video essays. Now, let me clarify. When I say autism, that is simply because that is what I have and also what the most common through line seems to be, but I am also including other neurodivergent conditions as a part of this, as you will see later. You see, I had this thought that a lot of video essayists and enjoyers of video essays seem to be on the spectrum or neurodivergent in some other way. However, I am also aware that this is a bias, as that is the sort of content I often seek out, and the majority of my friends and family are also neurodivergent. So, with some encouragement from a few people in the Essay Library's Discord server, I have decided to take a closer look to see if there really is something there or not. First, let's look at some anecdotal evidence. This isn't set in numbers or anything of the sort, but rather where I started off in this train of thought. The first video essay that really got me into video essays as a medium was Toon Ruins' video about autism representation in media. Not because I sought it out, but simply because it had popped up on my recommended. At the time, I did not have an autism diagnosis, but this is a pattern I have seen a few other times over the years, including on newer accounts that wouldn't necessarily know that's the sort of content I like, suggesting me video essays about autism often created by autistic people. A lot of fellow video essayists I have spoken to also, as it turns out, are neurodivergent. However, that's not to say every single one has been. My best friend is also autistic and, like me, enjoys watching video essays and has an interest in making them himself. There's another person I know in real life who is also made a few video essays and also happens to have ADHD. Notably, though, I also have plenty of neurodivergent friends and family who express little to no interest in video essays, as well as neurotypical ones who do. So it's by no means a one-to-one thing. And this leads me into the main point of evidence for this video. For this video, I ran a Google Forms survey to try and get some broader numerical evidence about this subject. Now, in no way is this a professional research study. There ended up being 85 responses, which is more than I expected, but also a pretty small sample size. Furthermore, while there were a few places I put the survey that were more generalized, two of the main sources I went to for sharing this survey were online spaces for neurodivergent people and online spaces for video essay creators and viewers. So the sample size of neurotypical people and people who don't care about video essays, while not non-existent, is quite small. I also explicitly stated on the form, as well as most of my postings about the survey, that answers remain anonymous but would be in full or in part used for the video, so there shouldn't be any issues there. Now, the first question I asked was a simple, "Are you neurodivergent?" alongside a clarification that self-diagnoses are accepted so long as proper research has been done, as it is oftentimes difficult, impossible, unsafe, or unwise for people to get formal diagnoses. This isn't a point I will be debating in the comments. I just want to be absolutely transparent about how I structured the survey. Anyways, this was a checkbox question, meaning that participants were able to pick multiple, as neurodivergent conditions often don't come alone, and the options I put were autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia and/or dyscalculia, Tourette syndrome or allergic disorder, dyspraxia, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, dissociative identity disorder or otherwise specified dissociative disorder, other not listed here as a sort of catch-all for anything else that one would consider neurodivergent, because that can be a quite lengthy list and I didn't want to bloat the survey too much, choose not to answer, and finally, neurotypical, meaning that you do not, to your knowledge, have any neurodivergent condition. The next question was, do you create or watch video essays? And this was a multiple choice question, meaning you could only pick one answer, just to keep things simple. The options were create, watch, both, and neither. While those two questions were requirements for the survey, the third and final question was optional, meaning that participants did not have to fill it out to complete the survey. Because of this, while there is 85 responses for the previous two questions, the third question only had 67. It was a text box where participants were able to type out whatever answer they saw best fit. And the question was, if you said yes to one or both, meaning you create and/or watch video essays, explain in your own words why you create and/or watch video essays. So, now that you know the setup of the survey, let's look at the responses, shall we? To start off, out of the 85 responses, the top result for the first question was autism spectrum disorder, meaning that 69.4% of participants, or more specifically, 59 participants on the survey, had autism spectrum disorder. 8.2%, or 7 participants, answered that they were neurotypical, and 4.7%, or 4 participants, chose not to answer. In terms of the other options, from most to least, we have 44.7% for ADHD, 22.4% for PTSD, 20% for other, 12.9% for Tourette's and allergic disorders, 10.6% to both the dyslexia and/or dyscalculia option and obsessive-compulsive disorder, 9.4% to DID or OSDD, and 5.9% to dyspraxia. So, to summarize, 87.1% of the 85 participants checked at least one neurodivergent condition, and the other 12.9% were neurotypical or undisclosed. As for the second question, 11.8% of people picked that they neither watch nor create video essays, and the other 88.2% picked one or both. More specifically, 71.8% or 61 participants said that they watch video essays, 15.3% or 13 participants said that they watch and create video essays, and 1.2% or just one participant said that they just create video essays. Now, one could come to their own conclusions about whether or not the two things are correlative just based on those numbers. But, again, the sources of these participants do come along with a bias on certain answers, so it really wouldn't be right to base a whole argument just on those numbers. No, the real data data comes from when we look at the third question and how those written answers look alongside their answers to the first question. So, to start, let's just look at the people who marked down that they are neurotypical. Interestingly, while 7 participants in total did check the neurotypical box, there are only 6 people who only checked that box, meaning that the other participant either misclicked or misread something. This is also why I didn't want to go based solely off of numbers, as inaccuracies like this were bound to happen. Of these 6 neurotypical participants' responses, 4 marked that they only watch video essays. 1 was actually the same participant who marked that they only create video essays, and 1 marked that they watch and create video essays. Only 4 of the 6 gave a written response, so those are the ones we will be looking at more specifically. We'll start with the ones who said that they only watch video essays. 1's response was that it's fun to learn about a new thing that they didn't know, and it's also interesting to see someone else's take on something that they have their own opinions on, which is pretty general and speaks to the appeal that many viewers find regardless of neurology. Another said that they find them interesting, but they're usually only recommended or enjoy ones about topics they're passionate about, which draws back to what I said at the top about how my anecdotal evidence is heavily influenced by what I seek out and, in turn, what ends up on my recommended. The other 2 who said that they only watch video essays did not give a written response. As for the participant who only creates video essays, their response was that they've got something to say. No one has said it yet, so they're saying it. And then it's also a good creative exercise for their brain. Everyone needs a good brain exercise now and again, and I think a lot of people have a want to add to a conversation, so this all makes plenty of sense for why somebody would create video essays, even if that's not the type of content they personally watch. And the neurotypical participant who said that they both watch and create video essays stated that they do so for education, entertainment, and expression, typically all at once, which is a pretty good summary of the purposes for a lot of video essays. So, the response from neurotypicals is pretty standard reasons for liking video essays. For the sake of fairness, I'm also going to share some standard responses from neurodivergent participants, because genuinely the last thing I want to do is other our community by making it seem like we can only partake in something or enjoy something if it ties back to neurodivergence in some way. Just because one autistic person connects to something in a distinctly autistic way doesn't mean that every other autistic person will. Again, it's a spectrum and no group of people is a monolith.
There is the saying, if you've met one autistic person, you have met one autistic person.
To start, somebody who marked other not listed here for condition and marked that they both watch and create video essays said that they want to share the things that make them happy in hopes of enriching other people's lives or just to celebrate their shared love of said things. They want to connect with communities that share the interests that virtually no one in their real life cares about. It is the human condition to seek out connection over things that people have in common. For some, this simply isn't feasible in the real world, and one of the joys of the internet is that you can still find that community, even if no one in your personal life gets it. And video essays are a good way to achieve that. This person, who marked for Tourette's or other tic disorder and that they watch video essays, said they like video essays because they can always pick up new info from them, either facts or opinions, and they like knowing another's point of view. They're usually long enough that they can do art while listening to them as well. Sometimes they'll watch them because they're ranting about a niche community they're a part of and it feels like they're talking to someone, or at least listening to their ideas. Even if it's about something they've never heard about, maybe the essay can introduce them to it. Again, this speaks to the broader purpose of video essays, which is to educate, entertain, and express, and also shows why, say, an artist would appreciate them, as they can serve the same function that a podcast or music playlist does when you're doing something that doesn't require your full focus. And, just to share one more generalized response from a neurodivergent participant, this person marked that they have autism and watch video essays, and they said that they love watching video essays because they can help inform them on topics that they are either uneducated on or want more information on, which, again, speaks to most people's want to learn and grow as people and see perspectives that aren't necessarily identical to their own. So, clearly, Secondly, it's not a one-to-one thing. If you like video essays, that doesn't automatically mean that you're neurodivergent, and if you're neurodivergent, that also doesn't automatically mean that you'll like video essays. Out of the participants who marked that they neither watch nor create video essays, all but one of them marked that they have a neurodivergent condition. The only one who didn't left their status on that front undisclosed. Based on this evidence, it would seem that there is no correlation. Well, better pack it up, there's no point to this video anymore. Except, there's still 60 written responses I haven't shared with you. Now, of course, not every single one of them directly references neurodiversity. There are still a good number of responses from neurodivergent and undisclosed participants that list general reasons for enjoying the viewing and or creation of video essays. However, there are a number that tie the two things, neurodiversity and video essays, together, and I would like to look at some of those now. This person marked that they have ADHD and Tourette's, or another tic disorder, and watch video essays because long-form content deep diving on specific issues scratches an itch for them as someone who has short, intense hyperfixations. This is also more constructive than fixating on a hobby and buying everything for it before losing interest a day later. It's basically an outlet for them to obsess quickly and intensely over something without it being maladaptive. Like I said at the top, hyperfixations can become disruptive and disabling for some people, and this person directly links our two focuses by essentially saying that they use video essays as a treatment of sorts to make their hyperfixations less problematic to their quality of life. This person marked that they have autism, ADHD, dyslexia and or dyscalculia, PTSD, OCD, and at least one unlisted condition, and that they watch video essays because it makes them feel less alone. Having such a long list of disorders can feel isolating, but they like when other people hyperfixate on things so they can be like, haha, you're weird too, directly referencing the social isolation they feel because of their conditions as a key reason for why they seek out video essays. Living with autism or any neurodivergent condition can be very isolating at times, especially if you don't have a good support system, due to the communication differences from neurotypical folks and the social stigma surrounding having a mental disorder and or disability. This is part of why so many neurodivergent people also struggle with mental illness, such as anxiety or depression, so it makes sense why somebody would seek out something online that makes them feel less alone.
Anyone could ask me anything, but for the most part, none of you do. You just rather make assumptions. For example, many of you assumed from my last vlog that the lie was that I have a robust social life. But in fact, I'm incredibly well connected with people from all around the world on sites like Wattpad and Reddit.
This person marked down that they have autism and said that they watch video essays because they are a convenient and cohesive way of learning about interesting subjects and their special interests. Sometimes they don't talk about their interests with other people in fear of boring them, so they watch video essays to kind of fill that void. Of course, this experience is by no means exclusive to neurodivergent people, but it is the common experience of many people on the spectrum, especially if they're high-masking, late diagnosed, or otherwise don't have a strong support system, to be afraid of info dumping in case it annoys people, often due to negative past experience. Watching a video essay of somebody else talking about the thing you like could be a solid compromise for some people struggling with this. This person marked that they have autism, OCD, and PTSD, and said that they watch video essays because of the desire for knowledge paired with long formats to keep their brains stimulated but not overwhelmed while multitasking. A lot of the written responses talk about having video essays on in the background while they work on other things. I think this is a very common usage of video essays, especially the ones that are multiple hours long. This person also specifically references the need for mental stimulation and the struggle to find balance with that. Video essays, especially if they're ones you've seen before or by a creator you're familiar with, can almost replicate white noise, though in a way that some may find more calming, so they're a good way to balance that out. Many neurodivergent people have difficulty finding balance between being understimulated and overstimulated, so it's good good to find things that help aid in that. This person marked that they have ADHD and OCD, and that they both watch and create video essays because they've wanted to be a writer since 6th grade, and the one piece of advice that they've consistently gotten on how to improve as a writer is to simply read as much as they can. That, unfortunately, cannot be a reality for them because of their ADHD, but they deeply want to engage with creative writing beyond their own work, and video essays have filled that gap for them in a way nothing else can. For 8+ years now, they've been watching them first for entertainment, but now the write essays can feel truly enriching in a way that nothing else can, and they're finally at a point where they want to contribute to that and will be releasing their first video essay of their own soon. I would first like to wish you the best in the creation and release of your own content. Anyways, though, back to the topic at hand, this person lists the viewing of video essays as an accommodation of sorts. Due to presumably the focusing issues that come along with ADHD, they find reading to be difficult, so, to accommodate this, they've taken to instead watching video essays as a sort of compromise. While I don't have ADHD, I do struggle with reading due to the processing issues that come along with autism, so I can confirm firsthand that audio-visual media, at least for some, can be a lot easier to follow along with than a book. This person marked that they have ADHD, PTSD, and one or more unlisted conditions, and said that they watch video essays to study certain things like their diagnosis. Video essays can be a good research tool for any topic, and it can especially be helpful to get information about certain disorders or medical conditions from someone who has lived experience with that thing, as opposed to a very clinical, impersonal, and sometimes even inaccurate medical website. Of course, those sources are also invaluable in their own way, but it can feel more comforting and educational to get information about, for example, dissociative identity disorder from someone who actually has the condition as opposed to like a random neurotypical doctor. Additionally, if you have a condition that is widely stigmatized or poorly researched, then that first-hand knowledge becomes an even more important resource. There were a number of other responses from neurodivergent participants that specifically reference their neurodivergence and how that overlaps with an interest in video essays, but most of them go over points we've already seen brought up, so I'm not going to sit here and list off every single one, as that would be redundant. This video is long enough as it is. While again, it is hardly one-to-one, and there were many neurodivergent participants who either don't engage with the medium, or do but listed more generalized reasons for it, I think it is important to note that for a decent chunk of participants, the two things are linked for one reason or another. Perhaps it's not as strong of a correlation as one may assume when their entire feed is video essays by autistic or otherwise neurodivergent creators, but the two things aren't completely isolated from each other either. And on that note, I would like to finally directly talk about where I fall on this, for lack of a better term, spectrum. As I stated at the beginning, the video essay that got me into video essays, and subsequently a lot of the video essays I seek out now, have to do with autism or are at least made by neurodivergent creators. Even when this isn't the case, I'm typically only seeking out video essays that relate to my hyperfixations or special interests. I'll branch out sometimes, but like given the choice between a 4-hour video essay about Sonic the Hedgehog and a 20-minute video essay about, I don't know, The Legend of Zelda, I'm going to pick the Sonic video even though it's way more of a time sink, because that's what I'm hyperfixated on, so most other subjects, especially if it's something I don't really care about, just feel like a waste of time to me. Watching video essays is also the most effective way for me to learn more about my hyperfixations and special interests because of my aforementioned difficulties with reading. Thankfully, with Sonic at least, there are a countless number of interesting and informative video essays and ranking videos out there, so I've been able to learn a ridiculous amount about the franchise, and I'm still learning more every day because of these essays. In addition to these educational purposes, it can sometimes be nice to hear different perspectives on things. The thing about this, though, is that I struggle pretty pretty hard with the mental inflexibility that sometimes comes along with autism. Some people word this as a strong sense of justice or black and white thinking, but I don't feel like either of those are necessarily the most applicable terms, at least for me specifically. The point is, if I have a strong perspective on something, it can be very frustrating to me to hear other people strongly stating opposing viewpoints. Because of this, I'm typically seeking out video essays that either align with my viewpoints, don't express any specific opinions, only briefly express opposing viewpoints, or are about topics I don't know or don't care enough about to really mind either way. I will typically avoid or click off of videos that I find frustrating because I do not see a point in sitting through something that's just going to piss me off. However, with that said, the occasional different perspective can be nice to hear, especially for any subjects I'm new to or don't have any strong opinions on. These video essays can introduce me to new topics and help me better form my own thoughts on things. I also, like many of the participants on the survey, will often use video essays as background noise while I'm working or as something to fall asleep to. I have a lot of sleep problems, but I do consistently tend to sleep better if I have a long video essay that I've seen a few times playing quietly in the background. I also work better with video essays as background noise as opposed to silence or music. With silence, my brain tends to get understimulated, which makes me restless and have a harder time focusing. With music, I have the opposite problem, since my brain tends to focus more on the music than my work, and I'll just wind up humming along to the song and thinking about applicable time signatures instead of, working. Most of this script was actually written with sonic video essays playing in the background. It just works for me. All of these reasons do, in part, tie back to me being neurodivergent. However, pretty much everything in my life is affected in some way, shape, or form by me being autistic. It informs how I process information and interact with others, and seeps into every aspect of my existence in one way or another. So I think the more telling side of how the two things, video essays and autism, relate, in my case, is why I make video essays. So, as a bit of background, I have been uploading videos to YouTube since I was 8 years old, so first or second grade of elementary school. I began making video essays in late middle school, so 7th or 8th grade. I did not realize I was autistic until my freshman year of high school, 9th grade, and I did not receive an official diagnosis until 10th grade, my sophomore year. So for the first year or two of me creating video essays, I did not even know I was autistic, let alone have a formal diagnosis. This may make it sound like the two things don't correlate, but it's important to remember that condition always predates diagnosis. A diagnosis, at base level, is just a professional identification of said condition. I also have fibromyalgia, which is a chronic illness and pain disorder, but I went many years experiencing very clear symptoms before I was diagnosed or knew exactly what the issue was. And, like with that, I've always been autistic, and I've always experienced the various things that come along with it. I just didn't necessarily have the language to put to those things. My entire life, I've had all-consuming special interests and hyperfixations. Hell, the whole reason I started making YouTube videos in the first place is because I was deeply hyperfixated on the, at the time, new video game series Five Nights at Freddy's. And I wanted a space I could share that passion more freely because the people in my life didn't necessarily want to be subjected to countless hours of info dumps and excitement about a flawed indie game franchise. 5 or 6 years later, this reasoning would turn into me making my first video essays, which were about Steven Universe because that's what I was hyperfixated on at the time. I didn't have many friends or really anyone else who would want to listen to my thoughts and info dumps about the series, at least not frequently. So I turned to video essays, a medium which I'd been enjoying the viewing of for a few years up to that point. Video essays, to me, have always been something I do for myself, to share my thoughts on various topics, and in some instances, to give scripted and thorough info dumps about things I like to other people. Even when I am able to info dump to someone who is willing to listen person, I'm not always the best with my words, especially if it's in person. So a video essay is a good way to communicate certain concepts that I've failed to get across well in person, since I can spend time on a script and putting clarifications and revisions into the video itself. This is actually a large part of why I made my last video, which was about the title number of Cabaret. That video got way more views than I expected, and yeah, a lot of people missed the point I was making, but that's to be expected. The most frustrating comments, for me, apart from the outright insulting ones, were the ones that presumed or insinuated that I had made the video to be a know-it-all or tell people how they're supposed to consume media, which wasn't at all the reasoning. Like many of my other videos, that was made for personal fun and to more thoroughly explain a point I had failed to word properly in person to people in my real life. This is actually the downside of making video essays as an autistic person, at least in my case. Like I explained earlier, one of the specific traits I have pretty strongly is mental inflexibility. Usually, this doesn't interfere too much with my own video essays, since, well, I'm the one making them, but I have had a few examples of essays that got a lot of views and then resulted in a lot of comments adamantly telling me I'm wrong, or overall missing or misunderstanding the point of said videos. Feeling misunderstood is frustrating for anyone, but it's this mental inflexibility that really causes issues for me when this happens. Overall, though, making these essays has been very beneficial to me in ways that it wouldn't be, at least not to the same extent and not in the same ways, if I was neurotypical, because of how it helps me manage hyperfixations and communicate my thoughts to others. So, is there a correlation between video essays and neurodivergence? Well, yes. However, it is not as strong of a correlation as I initially thought. Yes, video essays are a good way for neurodivergent people to deal with various things and can be easier for self-expression compared to other methods. And a lot of people who are neurodivergent will gravitate towards watching and or creating video essays because of this. However, this isn't the case for every neurodivergent person. Like I said, no one group of people is a monolith, and there are plenty of neurodivergent people who have no interest in video essays. And even out of the ones that do, their reason for that interest does not always necessarily have to do with their neurodivergence. There are also plenty of neurotypical people who enjoy creating or watching video essays. In most cases, neurodivergent people will be the minority, especially in something broad and popular like video essays. That's just the way it is. So, to answer the question, I would say that there is a correlation, but it's a bit weak and ultimately not necessarily that important. If you're autistic and video essays have helped you in that regard, then that's good. If not, then that's also plenty well and good. This is ultimately a dive into a niche subject that doesn't really matter all that much. Nonetheless, hopefully you gained something from this. If you did, maybe consider checking out some of my other videos if any of them strike your interest, but there is no pressure on that front. Stay safe, stay hydrated, and have a nice day.